This HOA Karen stormed into my new lake cabin office, screaming about violations just days after my company moved its headquarters there. She barged in, phone recording my face, threatening to shut me down with on-the-spot fines for running a business on what she called HOA property. I was just about to hand her the official survey map, proving she was trespassing by over 400 feet, but she had absolutely no idea who was scheduled to walk through that door for a private meeting. Then it happened. The door swung open, and Karen Weller froze mid-sentence, her jaw hitting the floor when she saw the governor of the entire state standing right behind her. What secret was she hiding that made the sight of the governor so terrifying? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because you are not going to believe the criminal enterprise I was about to expose. The first week at the new headquarters was exactly what I'd planned for. My company, which designs and builds submersible drones for environmental monitoring, needed a secure, private location. The old office park was a fishbowl too many random visitors, too much noise, and zero access to the water we needed for testing. So, I moved the whole operation to a large plot of land I'd owned for 15 years, situated on a quiet lake hours from the city. The centerpiece was a solid log cabin I'd spent the last year converting into a state-of-the-art office and workshop. I'd run fiber optic cable a half-mile through the woods myself, installed soundproofing in the walls, and built a custom workbench that overlooked the water. That first Monday morning, I was sitting at my desk, sipping coffee from a thick ceramic mug, watching the mist burn off the lake. The air was still, broken only by the call of a loon. The only hum came from our servers, tucked away in a climate-controlled room. It was peaceful. It was productive. It was perfect. This was the reward for 2 decades of hard work, a place where my team and I could innovate without distraction. We valued precision, privacy, and results, and this new location delivered all 3. The calm lasted exactly 4 days. On Friday morning, the mail carrier left a single, stiff envelope in our new commercial-sized mailbox at the end of the long gravel driveway. It didn't look like an invoice or client communication. The envelope was a cheap off-white, and the logo in the corner was for something called the Lakeview Properties Homeowners Association. The lettering was done in an aggressive, sharp font that tried too hard to look official. I slid it open with the edge of a ruler. Inside, a single sheet of paper, thicker than the envelope but still feeling flimsy, announced itself as a notice of violation. My eyes scanned the text. It accused me of conducting unauthorized commercial activity on HOA property and demanded I cease all operations immediately. A fine of $200 was already levied, with a warning that it would double every 7 days the violation continued. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of coffee, a small, dry smile touching my lips. It was, without a doubt, the most absurd piece of mail I had ever received. You see, I knew for a fact that my property was not, and had never been, part of any homeowners association. I had the paperwork to prove it, filed away in a fireproof cabinet not 10 feet from where I sat. I bought this land back when I was still working as an engineer, long before I started my own company. It was a foreclosure, sold directly by the county. I remembered the day of the auction vividly. I was the only person there who had done their homework. While others were bidding on smaller lots closer to the main road, I had my sights set on this secluded parcel at the far end of the lake. I'd spent the week prior at the county records office, pulling the original plat maps from the 1950s. The property lines were clear as day, marked by iron survey stakes that I'd located myself with a metal detector, buried under years of pine needles. My deed was recorded with the state, stamped with the county seal, and showed a clear boundary line that stopped a full 400 feet short of the nearest neighboring plot. The Lakeview Properties HOA wasn't even a thought back then. It was formed 6 years after my purchase was finalized, a fact I had also confirmed. They'd cobbled together a group of newer properties on the other side of a creek that served as a natural border. They had absolutely zero jurisdiction over my land. Their authority ended where my property began. The letter was a classic intimidation tactic, aimed at someone who didn't know their rights or was too busy to fight back. They were hoping for a quick check in the mail from an uninformed new neighbor. I ran a small company, But my background in engineering and project management had taught me one critical lesson: document everything and never yield to bullies who use fake authority as a weapon. This letter was not a legal document. It was a bluff, and a clumsy one at that. My first instinct was to file it in the trash can. Engaging with these people would only invite more drama, and I had a business to run. We were in the middle of a major project, refining the sensor array for a new submersible drone designed to detect microplastic concentrations. The work required focus, testing, and collaboration with some very important and very private partners. The governor himself was scheduled for a quiet visit next week to see a demonstration, as the state was considering a grant that would take our work to the next level. I didn't have time for petty neighborhood squabbles based on fraudulent claims. I dropped the letter onto a stack of low-priority papers on the corner of my desk. I'd ignore it. Let them send another. Let them waste their own time and money. They had no power here. I turned my attention back to my monitor, pulling up the schematics for the new drone's sonar housing. The peace and quiet returned. But then, about an hour later, I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was the crunch of heavy, deliberate footsteps on the gravel path leading from the driveway to the cabin's porch. Not the light tread of a delivery driver, but the firm, rhythmic stomp of someone on a mission. The steps came closer, louder, and then they stopped. I waited for a knock. None came. Instead, I heard the sharp, metallic click of the porch door handle turning. The clock on my computer screen read 10:47 a.m. The quiet hum of the server room was suddenly overpowered by the unceremonious bursting open of the main cabin door. There was no knock, no warning. The door swung inward with enough force to bang against the interior wall, and a woman I'd never seen before stormed into my office as if she owned the place. She was in her late 50s, with a severe haircut and a face set in a permanent scowl. She wore a tight-fitting polo shirt, the color of a faded lemon, with the same aggressive Lakeview Properties HOA logo from the envelope stitched over her heart. In one hand, she clutched a clipboard like a weapon. In the other, she held up a smartphone, its camera lens pointing directly at me. Her thumb was already jabbing at the screen, no doubt recording. This had to be the author of the letter. "This is an official inspection," she announced, her voice sharp and loud, cutting through the calm of the room. Her eyes darted around my office, taking in the monitors, the specialized equipment on the workbenches, the schematics pinned to a corkboard. A smirk of satisfaction spread across her face. Just as we suspected. A full-scale commercial operation. She took another purposeful step forward, her heavy-soled shoes making loud, ugly sounds on the polished wood floor my grandfather had installed 60 years ago. I swiveled my chair to face her but didn't stand up. Rising to her level would be accepting her premise that she had some right to be here. My engineering background drilled into me the importance of maintaining a calm demeanor while a system is failing. And right now, this woman was a failing system. "You're on private property," I said, my voice even and low. I wanted to see how she'd react to a simple statement of fact. She laughed, a short, barking sound. "This entire lakefront is HOA property, mister, and you are in direct violation of Community Bylaw 14, which prohibits unauthorized business activity." She smacked the clipboard with the back of her hand. "I'm Karen Weller, president of the association, and I am issuing an on-the-spot fine of $500 for the violation, and another $200 for refusing to cease operations." She was a whirlwind of false authority, all bluster and accusation. While she spoke, I discreetly reached under the edge of my desk and pressed the small button on the digital audio recorder I keep there. The tiny red light blinked once, and then went dark. Every word she said from this point forward was being documented. I learned a long time ago that when dealing with people who invent their own rules, it's best to have a clear, indisputable record of their inventions. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my tone respectful but firm, "I'm going to need to see two things. First, your personal identification. Second, the legal document that gives you or your association the authority to enter my property." Her face hardened. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of anger. "I don't have to show you anything," she snapped. "My authority comes from the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You agreed to them when you moved in. I didn't move in. I owned the land before her. HOA was a line item in some developer's budget. Instead of arguing, I simply swiveled back to my computer. With a few clicks of the mouse, I pulled up 2 files from a folder on my desktop labeled Property Official. The first was a high-resolution scan of the official county plat map, clearly showing the boundary lines of my parcel, legally distinct from the tracts that made up the Lakeview Properties development. The second was a digital copy of the boundary survey I'd had commissioned before I even broke ground on the cabin renovations. It was stamped by a licensed state surveyor. On the screen, a bold red line showed precisely where my property ended and where the land she claimed to govern began. There was a 400-foot gap, a buffer of woods and creek, between my land and her jurisdiction. I clicked print. The laser printer on the credenza behind me hummed to life. While the page printed, she continued her rant. I see multiple safety violations here too. Exposed wiring, unpermitted construction. She gestured vaguely at a set of blueprints for a new drone prototype. She was just making things up now, throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what might stick. The printer slid the finished survey map into the output tray. I stood up, calmly walked over to retrieve it, and turned back toward her. I held the paper out. This is a certified survey map from the county recorder's office, I said. It shows you are currently trespassing. I'd like you to take it, leave my property immediately, and direct any future communication to my lawyer. I was about to point to the exact survey marker on the map when the cabin door opened again. This time, it opened slowly, quietly. A man in a simple, well-tailored suit stepped inside, his presence immediately changing the entire atmosphere of the room. It was Governor Ryan Blake, right on time for our 11:00 a.m. meeting. He was followed by a state trooper in a crisp uniform, who remained by the door. Karen Weller froze. Her mouth, which had been opened to deliver another angry retort, hung slack. Her eyes went wide, and every bit of color drained from her face. She wasn't just surprised, she was terrified. The phone in her hand lowered. The clipboard slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. She stared at the governor, a man known across the state for his calm demeanor and his intolerance for fraud. Her carefully constructed bubble of authority didn't just leak. It burst in a silent, violent pop. The governor, ever perceptive, took in the scene in an instant. My calm demeanor, the map in my hand, and this woman's sudden, visceral panic. Before he could even speak, Karen stammered, we can discuss this later. She didn't even bother to pick up her clipboard. She turned and practically bolted out of the door, scurrying past the trooper like a frightened mouse. The governor watched her go, a curious, thoughtful expression on his face. He then turned to me and nodded. "Mark," he said, "looks like I arrived at an interesting time." But I was watching Karen's retreat through the window. Her reaction was more than just the embarrassment of being caught. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. What was it about the governor's presence that could trigger such a response? It was clear she wasn't just hiding a bogus claim to my land. She was hiding something much, much bigger. After the governor and I finished our very productive meeting, and after I had assured him the interruption was an anomaly, I was handling his presence lingered in the room long after he'd left. It wasn't just the honor of the visit, it was Karen Weller's reaction. Her fear was a loose thread on a poorly stitched garment, and I couldn't resist the urge to pull it. The governor's visit was strictly professional, centered on a potential state partnership to use my company's drones for monitoring the health of state-managed waterways. It was a big deal for my small company, a project that required absolute discretion. A public spat with a local HOA was the last thing I needed. But Karen had crossed a line. She hadn't just sent a letter. She had physically invaded my workspace. And her panicked exit told me this wasn't just a simple boundary dispute. There was something else going on, something she was desperate to keep hidden, especially from the eyes of a high-ranking state official. My objective shifted. It was no longer about simply getting the HOA to leave me alone. Now, I needed to understand what exactly I had stumbled into. My engineering mind kicked into gear. I approached the problem not as a personal conflict, but as a system analysis. The system was the Lakeview Properties HOA, and its output was fraudulent claims and harassment. I needed to analyze its components to find the point of failure. The first step was to dig into Karen Weller herself. Public records are a powerful tool if you have the patience to navigate the often clunky government websites. I spent the next few hours cross-referencing her name with county court records, business licenses, and property databases. In her former life as a real estate agent, I found a digital footprint. There were plenty of glowing reviews, but tucked away in the civil court archives was a lawsuit filed 8 years prior. A family had accused her of falsifying disclosure forms to hide severe water damage in a home she was selling. The case had been settled quietly, the record sealed, but the accusation itself was a bright red flag. It showed a history, a pattern, of using official-looking paperwork to bend the truth for personal gain. This wasn't her first time playing fast and loose with the facts. Next, I followed the simple 3-step method that had served me well in my career. First, gather all the official documents. I already had the deed and survey for my own property. Now, I went back to the county recorder's online portal, and for a small fee, downloaded the master plat maps for the entire Lakeview Properties development. I wanted to see the whole picture, the official boundaries of every lot under their supposed control. Second, compare the official documents to the claims being made. The HOA's claim was that my property was part of their association. The official maps showed, unequivocally, that it was not. My land was a distinct parcel, recorded years before their development was even zoned. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. The creek was the legal boundary, period. Third, document every interaction. I already had the audio recording of Karen's unauthorized inspection. It was clean, clear, and damning. The timestamp on the file read 10:47 a.m., Friday. With this initial evidence compiled, I drafted an email. It was polite, professional, and left no room for misinterpretation. I sent it not to Karen directly, but to the generic board member's email address listed on their flimsy website. The subject line was clear: incorrect violation notice for my property address. In the body of the email, I calmly stated that my property was not within the HOA's jurisdiction, and I attached the scanned copies of my deed and the certified county plat map as proof. I requested that they immediately rescind the violation notice and the bogus fine, and confirm in writing that they would cease all contact. I hit send and archived a copy. Silence. For 2 full business days, I heard nothing back. On the third day, I sent a follow-up. Incorrect violation notice for my property address, noting that I had not received a reply and was awaiting their correction of the record. Again, I attached the proof. Again, I was met with complete silence. This is when my suspicion began to harden into a certainty. Ignoring a simple factual correction is one thing, but ignoring legally recorded documents from the county is another. An honest mistake is corrected when presented with proof. A deliberate lie is defended with silence and denial. The entire HOA board was now complicit. Their refusal to even acknowledge my evidence suggested that Karen's actions weren't those of a rogue president on a power trip. This was organized. My mind kept going back to her claim about Community Bylaw 14 and her clipboard full of papers. It dawned on me that the HOA must be operating off of its own separate set of maps. An internal, unofficial map, one with boundaries that had been conveniently stretched to include valuable land they didn't own, like my lakefront. They were likely showing this fake map to new residents, using it to justify fees and exert control far beyond their legal reach. They weren't just harassing me. They were likely defrauding their own members. I drafted a third and final email. This time, the subject line read, "Formal notice of trespass and demand to cease harassment." In this email, I included all previous attachments, plus a link to the time-stamped video from my security camera showing Karen's car pulling up and her storming my office. and a full transcript of the audio recording of her illegal inspection. I sent this one via certified mail to the HOA's official address, with return receipt requested, and also emailed it to every board member individually. This level of proof was impossible to ignore. And yet, they did. The digital silence was deafening, but it told me everything I needed to know. This was no longer about a mistake. This was about fraud. A few days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from the state capital. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Ellison, this is Governor Blake." His voice was exactly as it had been in my office, calm, direct, and leaving no doubt who was speaking. I straightened up in my chair. He said he had been unable to shake the image of that woman, Karen Weller, and her panicked reaction to his arrival. "That wasn't just a simple disagreement I walked in on, was it?" he asked. I briefly explained the situation. The bogus violation notice, her illegal entry, and the HOA board's complete refusal to acknowledge the official county records I had sent them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "This woman, Karen Weller," the governor said, his voice lowering slightly. "She has been a recurring problem at state land use meetings. She shows up, makes demands about zoning and public access that have no legal basis, and generally obstructs progress. She has a reputation for being a nuisance." This was a critical piece of information. Karen wasn't just a local tyrant. She was a known agitator at the state level. Then the governor made an offer that stunned me. "My office has a small legal team that deals with municipal overreach," he said. "They'd be very interested in reviewing the HOA's claims and any documentation you have. This sounds like exactly the kind of thing they look into. Consider it a professional courtesy." While the governor's legal team began their work behind the scenes, I tried to focus on my own. But it's hard to design precision equipment when you have the nagging feeling you're being watched. A week after the governor's call, I was down at my dock, testing the water seals on a new prototype. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the public road that runs along the far side of the small cove. A man in plain clothes was standing near an old sedan, pointing a long-lensed camera not at the scenic view of the lake, but directly at my cabin and my dock. He was trying to be subtle, but on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, he stuck out like a sore thumb. He'd take a few pictures, then duck back behind his car. I didn't let on that I saw him. Instead, I casually used my own phone's camera, zooming in on his vehicle's license plate. It was a clear shot. I waited until he drove off, then went back inside and ran the plate through a public database service I use for verifying commercial shipping addresses. The result came back in under a minute. The car was registered to a Mr. Jack Myers. A quick search of the HOA's public-facing website showed a picture of the board members. There he was, with a forced smile, listed as the vice president. So, Karen had sent her second-in-command to spy on me. They weren't backing down, they were doubling down. This escalation changed my approach. This was no longer just about paperwork and emails. It was about physical intrusion. That evening, I drove to an electronics store and purchased 3 high-definition, motion-activated trail cameras. They were designed for hunters to track game, with excellent night vision and weatherproof housings. They were perfect for my needs. I spent an hour installing them, placing one discreetly in a pine tree, overlooking the full length of my driveway, a second one tucked into the dense foliage near the boundary line with the creek, and a third aimed directly at my private dock. Any movement on my property would trigger a recording and send an alert straight to my phone. For 2 nights, there was nothing but a few videos of a curious raccoon. But on the third night, just after 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. An alert from the camera covering the creek boundary. I opened the live feed. The night vision lens cast the scene in an eerie, monochrome green. 2 figures were moving slowly through the trees. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a surge of adrenaline. They had taken the bait. I watched as Jack Myers, the man with the camera, and another board member I recognized from the website, stepped deliberately over the creek and onto my property. Myers was holding a 50-foot measuring tape. They unspooled it, measuring the distance from the creek bank to the foundation of my cabin workshop. They were trespassing, at night, to gather their own fraudulent data. The camera recorded it, all their faces, their actions, the clear evidence of their criminal trespass. I saved the video file, a pristine, time-stamped piece of evidence. The very next afternoon, I received another call, this time from the governor's chief of staff. Her name was Elena, and her voice was all business. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "we found it." I leaned forward, listening intently. "The Lakeview Properties HOA filed an amended boundary plat with the county planning department 2 years ago," she explained. "It's a document that purports to be an official update to their original plat map." My blood ran cold. This was the forged map I had suspected, but it was worse than I thought. It wasn't just an internal document they were using to fool residents. They had filed it with a government office, trying to give it the weight of law. Then Elena delivered the final, fatal detail. "The problem," she said, her voice laced with the cold satisfaction of a winning lawyer, "is the date stamp on their filing. It's dated June 14th, 3 years after the county recorded the deed of sale for your property. Your ownership and your property lines were already a matter of public record, long before they submitted their little piece of fiction. What they did isn't just wrong, it's a felony. Filing a false instrument with a government agency to lay claim to property you don't own is fraud." I looked at the audio file of Karen's rant, the video of her vice president trespassing with a measuring tape. And now, the final piece of the puzzle. An officially filed, fraudulent document. The paper trail was complete. This was no longer a dispute. It was a crime scene. Even with the knowledge of the fraudulent filing in hand, I decided to give them one last chance to retreat gracefully. It was a professional courtesy I knew they didn't deserve, but I wanted it on the record that I had done everything possible to resolve this quietly. My patience was rewarded with a crisp, official-looking envelope that arrived a week later via certified mail. The letter inside was a masterpiece of arrogant ignorance. It informed me that my failure to comply with the previous notices had resulted in my fines escalating to $500 per day, retroactive to the date of the first notice. It demanded immediate payment of several $1,000s and threatened to place a lien on my property if the commercial activity did not cease within 48 hours. The letter was signed not just by Karen Weller, but by the entire HOA board. They had all put their names to the fraud. They had mistaken my methodical silence for weakness, and in doing so, had handed me the final nail for their collective coffin. I took their letter and laid it flat on my desk. Beside it, I placed my own, much thicker envelope. My response was also going to be sent via certified mail, but it would not be a letter of threats, it would be a letter of facts. My work as an engineer had taught me that a well-organized appendix can be more powerful than any legal argument. Inside my envelope was a simple cover letter addressed to Karen Weller and the full board. It stated, plainly and without emotion, that their claims were fraudulent, their actions constituted criminal trespass and harassment, and that all evidence of their activities had been compiled. Then came the appendix. I had itemized every piece of evidence. Attachment A was a copy of my recorded deed. Attachment B was the official county plat map. Attachment C was the certified survey I had commissioned. Attachment D was a full, notarized transcript of the audio recording of Karen's illegal entry into my office. Attachment E contained a set of high-resolution still images and a link to the complete video file from the trail camera, showing her vice president, Jack Myers, trespassing on my land in the middle of the night. The final, and most critical piece, was Attachment F. It was a copy of their own amended boundary plat, which I had obtained from the county planning department, with the fraudulent filing date circled in red. I concluded the letter by stating that copies of this entire package were being delivered simultaneously to the county sheriff's office and the state attorney general's office for their review. I gave them a deadline of 5 business days to send a written retraction of all claims and a formal apology, after which I would pursue all available legal remedies. Putting that package in the mail felt like launching a ship. I knew exactly where it was headed. For several days, the silence was absolute. I expected it. They were cornered, and cornered people rarely make rational decisions. The first sign of their panic came not from a letter, but from a phone call from a friendly neighbor who owned a slip at the local marina. "Mark, you might want to know," he said, his voice low. "That President Karen? She's down here at the Marina Cafe, telling anyone who will listen that you're some powerful businessman using your connections with the governor to steal HOA land." It was a classic bully tactic. When confronted with facts, play the victim and change the story. She was trying to paint me as the aggressor, a powerful outsider meddling in their community affairs. Her frantic public complaints were the death rattle of her credibility. She was creating a public spectacle, unaware that the real audience was not the handful of boaters at the cafe, but the state officials who were now watching her every move. The public outburst was the final piece the governor's office needed. Elena, his chief of staff, called me the next morning. "Mr. Ellison, the governor feels that Mr. Weller's public accusations have made a private resolution impossible. She's attempting to poison the well, so we need to set the record straight in a way that is undeniable." She then outlined the plan. The governor had scheduled an official site visit to my property for the following Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. But this wouldn't be a quiet chat like the last one. He was bringing guests. He would be accompanied by the head of the county surveyor's office, Sheriff Daniel Cooper himself, and the state land commissioner. It was a team of walking, talking facts. The surveyor would confirm the physical boundaries on site. The land commissioner would speak to the fraudulent document filing, and the sheriff would be there to keep the peace and enforce the law. They had invited Karen Weller and her board to attend to discuss their concerns. It was a perfectly executed trap, baited with the promise of a meeting she couldn't refuse. On the morning of the scheduled meeting, the air was crisp and clear. I stood on my porch, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, watching the driveway. I was calm. I had built my case on a foundation of solid proof, and the truth was about to be laid bare for all to see. At around 11:15 a.m., a familiar sedan pulled up and stopped, not in the designated parking area, but squarely in the middle of my driveway, blocking the entrance. Karen Weller got out, followed by Jack Myers and another board member. They didn't approach the cabin. Instead, they lined up across the gravel path, arms crossed, a pathetic, three-person barricade. They stood there, defiant and proud, ready to confront the governor's entourage. They truly believed they could intimidate their way to victory, unaware that they weren't about to have a discussion. They were about to become the subjects of an official proceeding. At precisely 11:30 a.m., a procession of three dark vehicles turned down my driveway. A county car was followed by a state-issued sedan, and finally, a marked sheriff's patrol car. They pulled up smoothly, parking in a neat row beside my cabin. As the officials began to step out, Karen Weller, flanked by her two silent board members, stood her ground in the middle of the path. She puffed out her chest, her expression a mixture of defiance and self-importance. She looked like someone who had watched too many courtroom dramas and thought she could win by shouting the loudest. She had no idea she was no longer a participant in a debate. She was the subject of an investigation that was about to conclude. The governor was the first to approach, not with a handshake, but with a polite, formal nod in her direction. "Miss Weller," he said, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Thank you for coming. We are here today to clarify the boundary issue you have raised." From the county car, a man in a work vest carrying a surveyor's tripod and a bundle of wooden stakes with bright orange flags stepped forward. He gave a simple nod to the sheriff, then walked directly to a known iron survey pin hidden in the grass near the rotopin I knew well. He set up his equipment with practiced efficiency, his movements precise and economical. Karen watched him, a look of confusion clouding her face. This wasn't the sit-down meeting she had envisioned. The surveyor began his work, walking a straight line toward the creek, his instruments guiding him. Every 50 feet, he would stop, take a reading, and then drive a bright orange stake firmly into the ground with a rubber mallet. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was rhythmic and final. Each stake was a physical point of fact, an undeniable piece of truth hammered into the earth. It took him less than 15 minutes to create a stark, bright line of flags stretching all the way to the water's edge, creating a clear, visual border. The line ran parallel to my cabin, exactly where my own survey said it should, leaving a massive 400-foot buffer of woods and wetlands between his flags and my dock. When the last stake was driven, Sheriff Daniel Cooper stepped forward, holding a large, rolled-up document. It was a certified copy of the original county plat map, the same one I had on my computer. He unrolled it with a crisp snap. His voice was not angry or accusatory. It was the voice of a man simply reading an official record aloud for everyone to hear. According to the plat map for Parcel 7A, filed with the county on May 12, 1958, he began, the property line runs from this marker. He pointed to the iron pin, due east for 950 feet to the center line of the creek. He then read the precise metes and bounds, the legal language that described the land's edges. As he spoke, the bright orange flags told the same story in a language anyone could understand. When he was finished, he rolled the map back up. The boundary is the creek, he said, looking at Karen. The structures, he gestured to my office, are not within the jurisdiction of the Lakeview Properties development. The two board members standing with Karen began to look visibly uncomfortable. They exchanged nervous glances, their wall of defiance beginning to crumble. This was when Governor Blake stepped forward again. In his hand, he held a small, professional audio recorder, identical to mine. He turned it on with an audible click. Ms. Weller, he said, his voice remaining perfectly level. My chief of staff found an amended boundary plat filed with the county, a document that claims this property falls under your HOA's control. It was filed under your tenure as president. Did you authorize the filing of that document? Karen's face went pale. The moment of truth had arrived, and she chose to lie. No, she said, shaking her head. Absolutely not. I have no idea what you're talking about. Our records must have been mixed up by a previous board. We're victims here too. But her act was unconvincing. Her eyes darted back and forth, looking for an escape that wasn't there. Then, a third official, a woman who had remained quiet until now, took a step forward. I am the State Land Commissioner, she said, her voice carrying an unshakable weight of authority. She held a single piece of paper, protected in a plastic sleeve. It was the fraudulent document. This is the amended plat in question, she said, holding it up for Karen to see. It claims to incorporate Parcel 7A into the HOA. She then pointed to the bottom of the page. And this, she said, her finger landing on a clear, looping signature, is your signature, dated August 20, of last year, 6 months after you were elected HOA president. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The two board members with Karen physically backed away from her, as if proximity itself were an accusation. Her lie had been instantly, surgically, and publicly dismantled. Her face, which had been pale with fear, now flushed a deep, blotchy red with humiliation. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. There was nothing left to say. Sheriff Cooper took 2 calm steps forward, stopping directly in front of her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Karen Weller, he said, his tone flat and official. You are under arrest for filing a false instrument and for criminal trespass. He gestured for her to turn around. She stood frozen for a moment, her entire world collapsing in a single instant. The sheriff gently took her arm and turned her, placing her hands behind her back. He produced a set of handcuffs. My hand had been resting on the digital audio recorder in my jacket pocket the entire time. As the metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoed in the quiet morning air, I made sure to press the button. Click. The sound was crisp, clear, and immensely satisfying. It was the perfect, documented end to her reign of lies. The 2 weeks following Karen Weller's arrest were a study in the quiet and efficient dismantling of a house of cards. The story of the showdown at my property spread through the lake community like wildfire, not as a piece of gossip, but as a cautionary tale confirmed by the presence of a sheriff's car at the HOA's clubhouse the very next day. While Karen was dealing with the criminal charges of filing a false instrumenta, felony, and criminal trespass, the civil matter of her HOA's fraudulent claims against me was fast-tracked through the county court system. The evidence I had compiled was so complete, so indisputable that there was very little to argue about. My lawyer, a quiet, methodical man I hired to handle the proceedings, told me it was the most open and shut case of HOA overreach he had seen in his 20-year career. He presented my package of documents, the deeds, the surveys, the audio recording, the time-stamped video of Jack Myers trespassing, and the state-certified proof of the fraudulent plat filing to the judge. The HOA's lawyer, a young man who looked deeply unhappy to be there, could offer no defense. He couldn't. The facts were a brick wall. The court's judgment was swift and absolute. In a hearing that lasted less than 30 minutes, the judge declared all HOA claims against my property null and void. He legally voided their amended boundary plat, ordering it to be permanently expunged from county records. But he didn't stop there. He issued a restitution order directly against Karen Weller, and by extension the HOA, as the entity that had backed her. She was ordered to pay for every cent of my legal fees, which my lawyer had meticulously itemized. The court also awarded me damages for harassment and for the business hours I had lost dealing with the matter. The final figure was substantial enough to send a clear message. Justice, in this case, had a clear price tag, and Karen Weller was going to pay it. The remaining HOA board members, including Jack Myers, who faced his own misdemeanor charges for trespassing, were required by the court to attend a mandatory seminar on property law and HOA governance. They were also compelled to draft and distribute a formal, written apology to every single member of the Homeowners Association, admitting their overreach and including a copy of the true, legally recorded plat map. Their brief reign of terror, built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, was over. For my part, I wanted to ensure this could never happen again. I wanted the truth to be not just known, but to be permanently visible. So, I took a portion of the damages I was awarded and invested it in a small community project. I went to the local marina, the very place Karen had tried to slander my name, and with the owner's enthusiastic permission, I installed a beautiful, professional-grade public bulletin board. It was made of solid oak with a weatherproof plexiglass cover and a small solar-powered light that illuminated it after dusk. Inside, I didn't post a victory speech or an angry tirade. I simply pinned a large, easy-to-read copy of the official county plat map, with the true boundaries of the HOA marked clearly in green. Beside it, I pinned a copy of the court order voiding the fraudulent claims. There was no commentary, no gloating. There didn't need to be. The documents spoke for themselves. They were quiet, irrefutable, and permanent. The reaction was immediate and profound. Over the next few weeks, as people saw the bulletin board, they would approach me not with applause, but with a quiet nod of respect. One older gentleman pulled me aside at the post office and told me he'd been paying bogus fines to Karen for 2 years for a shed that was supposedly too close to a boundary line that, as the map now showed, was 50 feet away from his property. A woman told me Karen had tried to force her to repaint her front door, claiming it was an unapproved color, even though her house wasn't even in the HOA. The board, under Karen's leadership, had been running a slow-motion extortion scheme for years, preying on people who were too tired, too intimidated, or too unsure of their rights to fight back. By simply presenting the facts, I had dismantled the entire machine. The most common thing I heard was a simple phrase, often delivered with a handshake: "Thank you for ending the nonsense." About a month later, the governor returned to the lake. This time, his visit was a public event, a ribbon-cutting ceremony to announce the official partnership between the state and my company for the waterway monitoring project. It was a proud day for me and my team. We stood by the dock as the governor spoke to a small crowd of local officials and press. At the end of his speech, he looked directly at me. "Partnerships like this are built on a foundation of trust and integrity," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. And speaking of integrity, I want to publicly commend Mark Ellison for his calm and methodical defense of his property rights. He reminded all of us that the best response to loud threats and false claims isn't to shout back, but to quietly gather the facts. He proved that the truth, when properly documented, is its own defense. His words were a public validation far greater than any court judgment. Standing there, looking out over the peaceful lake, I thought about the entire ordeal. It was never about winning a fight. It was about restoring a fundamental principle. You can't vote against gravity. It is a physical law that cannot be changed by opinion or intimidation. And in the same way, you can't stretch a boundary past the truth. The line is where the line is, and no amount of bullying, bluster, or bogus paperwork can ever truly move it.